Dilbert Dilemma, The Tragic Innumeracy of Scott Adams, by Benjamin Radford, from Skeptical Inquirer's online column News and Comment at skepticalinquirer.org. Cartoonist Scott Adams, creator of the comic strip Dilbert, that skewered and satirized corporate America and office workers around the world, died earlier this month. In reading the obituary of Adams in the New York Times, a recurring theme in Adams's life jumped out at me: how innumeracy and a lack of critical thinking played a role in the scandals that tarnished his reputation and ended his lucrative cartooning career. To be clear, I'm not suggesting that Adams was stupid or that his comics weren't, at least occasionally, funny. Instead, that he, like most people, fell for bogus statistics and arguments that could have been avoided with a bit of critical thinking. As the Times noted, the success of Dilbert gave Mr. Adams a platform to comment on a wide range of topics on his blog and podcast. Some of his views drew intense criticism. On his blog in 2006, he questioned whether the figure of 6 million Jewish deaths in the Holocaust was accurate, or a big number that someone pulled out of his ass. As it happens, I have researched and written about polls asking about that 6 million number. In April 2018, Newsweek posted a news story titled, "1/3 of Americans don't believe 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust." It was widely shared on social media, including Yahoo News, and seemed to suggest that neo-Nazis are succeeding in sowing Holocaust denial among Americans. The Holocaust is the highest-profile event in history about the dangers of intolerance and anti-Semitism, and with about 1/3 of Americans, over 100 million people, doubting a key aspect of the Holocaust, anti-Jewish sentiment seems widespread indeed. Headlines such as this can spawn fear and make Jewish Americans feel unwelcome or even unsafe in their own country. If taken at face value, it would mean that history teachers in America have failed across the board, and we might be teetering on the edge of some anti-Semitic flashpoint. With the stakes so high, it's worth taking a closer look at the story through the lens of media literacy and skepticism. The data came from a survey by Schön Consulting on behalf of the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, released for Holocaust Remembrance Day. It was a national study of 1,350 interviews with American adults during the last week of February 2018, with a margin of error at plus or minus 3%. If you actually read the study, you realize that the Newsweek headline is misleading in several important ways. First, the phrase "don't believe" in the headline implies doubt. When presented with a claim, the respondent states categorically that they do not believe it. However, the question, number 19 if you're following along, didn't ask respondents what they believe. People were asked to estimate, or put a number on, how many Jews they thought were killed. The exact wording is, approximately how many Jews were killed during the Holocaust. The responses were, in order of presentation: 20 million, 6 million, 2 million, 1 million, 100,000, 25,000, other, or not sure. Phrasing is extremely consequential in surveys. Finding out reliable data on Holocaust denial would require that the question be phrased in a way to remind respondents what the historical view of the Holocaust death toll is, then ask if they doubt that. If the question had been, "Do you, like most historians, believe that 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust?" then the percentage responding no would accurately capture how many Americans doubt that 6 million Jews were killed. It should also be noted that there is in fact no historical consensus on the exact number of Jewish deaths in the Holocaust, but most experts believe the number is between 5 and 6 million. Had the question been phrased more accurately by historical standards, and less precisely by estimation standards, as in, "Do you, like most historians, believe that about 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust?" it's quite possible that even more people would have correctly answered that question. A closer look at the survey answers reveals that among American adults, the correct answer of 6 million was the most popular answer, at 49%. 6% actually overestimated the number of Jews killed by over a factor of 3, 20 million. Note that the second most popular response, "not sure," at 13%, means just that they're not sure how many Jews were killed in the Holocaust. no reasonable person would interpret "not sure" as a catch-all response for none or an insignificant number or surely fewer than 6 million. It could mean the person thought that the number was closer to 15 million or 10 million or 8 million, or it could even be an expert on the subject who, quite honestly, admits that historians are divided on the exact number. For all we know, many of that 13% could have accurately estimated that about 6 million Jews were killed, but weren't confident enough in their grasp of historical facts to select that option. If that's the case, then the number who knew the correct answer could be over 60%. But we don't know because of the way the question was worded. To be clear, this limitation doesn't invalidate the question or render the survey or its results flawed. It just means that we must be careful in interpreting the results, especially on a subject as important as Holocaust belief or denial. Adams's question was a legitimate one, and if he sincerely wanted to know how scholars arrived at the about 6 million number, surely he could have done a bit of research to find that out instead of wondering if they'd pulled it out of their asses. In 2015, Adams gave Donald Trump a 98% chance of winning the next year's presidential election, saying that, "I picked 98% as my prediction because the statistician Nate Silver of the forecasting website 538.com was saying 2%. However, Adams had misunderstood. Silver's prediction was for becoming the Republican presidential nominee, not the next president. It was not a big deal, but Adams's inability or unwillingness to think critically about statistics and survey results would help sink his career 8 years later. As the Times notes, Adams used his podcast, Real Coffee with Scott Adams, to offer free-flowing commentary on the news, a platform that led to the comic strip's downfall. In February 2023, he was discussing a new Rasmussen Reports poll that found that only 53% of Black Americans agreed with the statement, "It's okay to be white." Adams, taking the survey results at face value, concluded that if nearly half of all blacks are not okay with white people, according to this poll, not according to me, according to the poll, that's a hate group, and I don't want to have anything to do with them, he said on the podcast episode. And I would say, based on the current way things are going, the best advice I would give white people is to get the hell away from black people. These comments, understandably and predictably, led to the loss of syndication and publishing deals. Adams complained and insisted that he was not racist, but the damage had been done. Amid the controversy, relatively little attention was paid to the survey that successfully baited Adams. What was that survey about, anyway? As Marisa Ayadi and Scott Clement of The Washington Post explained, the survey question was asked by the conservative-leaning Rasmussen Reports, whose head pollster described it as a simple and uncontroversial query. But in fact, the phrase in question has a freighted history that implies more than its face value meaning. The phrase, "It's okay to be white," was popularized in 2017 as a trolling campaign meant to provoke liberals into condemning the statement, and thus, the theory went, proving their own unreasonableness. White supremacists picked up on the trend, adding neo-Nazi language, websites, or images to flyers with the phrase. White supremacists have used the phrase since at least the early 2000s, said Mark Pitcavage, a senior research fellow for the Anti-Defamation League's Center on Extremism. 6 years ago, the term gained popularity when people on the discussion forum 4chan decided to employ the phrase as a stunt. The trolls posted sheets of paper with just the words, "It's okay to be white," on building doors and other public locations in the hope that some people would become upset and express frustration. Many people saw through the prank, Pitcavage said, and recognized its malicious intent. Even for people who are unfamiliar with it, he said, the weird phrasing may suggest that it is meant to troll or trigger them. You can see that phrase and easily recognize that someone's trying to get a rise out of you by using it, Pitcavage said. Disapproving of that statement and disapproving of whiteness or white people are two very different things. This tactic is well known in media literacy circles. In his classic book, Damned Lies and Statistics, Untangling Numbers from the Media, Politicians and Activists, Joel Best notes, survey researchers know that how questions are worded affects results. Advocates who can afford to sponsor their own surveys can shape the results. Usually, they try to demonstrate widespread support for their position. This is sometimes called advocacy research. Advocates word questions so as to encourage people to respond in the desired way. For example, surveys by gun control advocates may ask, "Do you favor cracking down against illegal gun sales?" Most people can be counted on to oppose illegal acts, and such questions routinely find that more than 3/4 of Americans favor gun control. On the other hand, the National Rifle Association opposes gun control, and it sponsors surveys that word questions very differently, such as, "Would you favor or oppose a law giving police the power to decide who may or may not own a firearm?" Not unexpectedly, most people answer that they oppose giving the police so much power, and the NRA can report that most Americans, roughly 3/4, oppose gun control. Thus, we see how changes in phrasing and framing can result in diametrically opposite results. John Allen Paulos, in his book Once Upon a Number, The Hidden Mathematical Logic of Stories, adds that the collection and dissemination of social statistics affect the quantities being measured. Most surveys of religious belief subtly discourage the expression of disbelief or unbelief. Sex surveys, to cite another notorious example, are unreliable for the simple reason that people very often lie when questioned about their sex lives by strangers. In one of the most infamous examples of flawed polling, a 1992 poll conducted by the Roper Organization for the American Jewish Committee found that 1 in 5 Americans doubted that the Holocaust occurred. How could 22% of Americans report being Holocaust deniers? The answer became clear when the original question was re-examined. Does it seem possible, or does it seem impossible to you, that the Nazi extermination of the Jews never happened? This awkwardly phrased question contains a confusing double negative, which led many to report the opposite of what they believed. Embarrassed Roper officials apologized, and later polls, asking clear, unambiguous questions, found that only about 2% of Americans actually doubted the Holocaust. With this context, we have a clearer picture of what happened to Adams. He was offered a sparkly conservative, race-baiting poll result, and he bought it hook, line, and sinker. Due to several factors, including confirmation bias and a lack of media polling literacy, Adams fell for the trolling trap laid out for him by Rasmussen and other conservative organizations. They must have been overjoyed at the attention their poll received from one of the world's most popular cartoonists, and they were happy to let him fall under the bus when he was criticized for sharing their skewed interpretations of what it meant. As Adams once advised in Dilbert, "Accept that some days you are the pigeon and some days the statue." This is not to say that Adams was blameless in his downfall. He made other controversial comments about women and minorities, but instead that some skeptical lessons could have helped him avoid the worst of it. Skepticism and critical thinking can pay off in innumerable ways. Thank you for listening to Skeptical Inquirer Audio Edition. This podcast is produced by the Center for Inquiry at our headquarters in Amherst, New York. If you would like to support our work, please consider subscribing to Skeptical Inquirer magazine at skepticalinquirer.org. It is listeners like you that make our work possible. With your support, we can continue to promote science, reason, and secular values throughout the world. Thank you.